Hello there.
General Kenobi.
Today we're going to be talking about aspect ratios. An aspect ratio is a relationship between the height and the width of the frame. Have you ever noticed black bars on top and bottom of your movie? That is caused by an aspect ratio. You probably wonder why some movies look like this, while some look like this, and some have no black bars at all. At a time in the 50s, most movies were shot on films with an aspect ratio of 4:3. That is the reason why many of the old TVs look like boxes because they have an aspect ratio of 4:3. They happen to be so to accommodate the square film cells of that time. Released in 1953, Shane, directed by George Stevens, was one of the very first widescreen movies. Well, not really. The film was shot in the Academy ratio, or also known as the 4:3 ratio, which was later cropped to give it a wider aspect. The audience loved it since it was something new and way immersive than before. Therefore, to actually shoot and capture a wider frame, the anamorphic lens was invented, which is still in use today. Anamorphic lens basically distorts the image, stretches the length of the image so that it can be squeezed back into its original wide format. Hence, you can shoot with an aspect ratio of 4:3, which will be distorted and super tall, but later you can stretch it back, resulting in a very wide angle. Robe in 1953 was the first movie to use this technology. Later on, the technology kept growing, and now we have a handful of aspect ratios, like the Academy ratio, the CinemaScope ratio, MGM 65, and IMAX ratio, to name a few. Nowadays, most of the monitors and TV screens that you see have an aspect ratio of 16:9. This was done to link the gap between wide formats like 235:1 and taller formats like 4:3. Therefore, 16:9 is the standard aspect ratio, as it can play almost every aspect ratio and still look good. DVD ratios are 16:9. HD 1080p ratio is 16:9. Even 4K ratio is 16:9. That was a quick history of how the aspect ratios have evolved. Coming back to the movies, I really want to draw your attention to the fact that aspect ratios are not just pieces of technology. They are the very size of your canvas. Just like the film's color palette, cinematography, and editing, aspect ratios can also be used to tell a story. How directors use the size of the canvas to convey their art. Ben-Hur was shot in an extremely wide aspect ratio that was 2.76:1. The Hateful Eight, directed by Quentin Tarantino, which is one of my favorites, is also shot really wide. Tarantino purposefully uses an old cinema camera with an aspect ratio of 2.76:1, which makes it look so wide.
That's what she said.
Never mind. Not only does it complement the cinematic beauty of the snowy vistas, but it also delivers the feeling of paranoia and uneasiness once it takes you inside the house, which is where most of the movie takes place. Christopher Nolan uses 2.39:1 for most of his work, but at times it changes to give us the IMAX shot scenes in all their beauty, ranging from movies like The Dark Knight, Dunkirk, and a few others where the action sequences seem huge. Thanks to IMAX. Interstellar is one of my favorite movies, and you've got to see it in IMAX. This is what Interstellar would look if you'd see it on any of the streaming services like Amazon Prime Video, or if you get the Blu-ray. But this is what Interstellar seems like if you get the IMAX Blu-ray. The way Endurance moves by the disks of Saturn, the mountain waves on the alien planet, and the event horizon of a distant galaxy's black hole are just some things you should experience in IMAX. It completes the canvas, it brings immersiveness to the story and to your viewing experience. A ghost story, even after being a modern movie, is shot in a 4:3 ratio to make the character and its audience feel trapped and claustrophobic, which again goes in relation with the story. They also rounded the edges to make it look like an old photograph or a memory. In Life of Pi, there are sequences where objects interact with the aspect ratio, and it feels as if they're jumping out of the canvas and coming to life. Some directors change the aspect ratio in the middle of the movie to communicate to the audience. The Grand Budapest Hotel is set in 3 different timelines, and Wes Anderson communicates that by different aspect ratios. When the scene takes place in 1930s, it's a 4:3 ratio. In the 60s, it's a 235:1 ratio. And in the 80s, it's a 185:1 ratio. All in a single movie. I think it's pretty cool. There's a movie that came out in 2014 called Mommy, and it was shot in a 1:1 ratio, which is a really small frame. Our main character feels insignificant and claustrophobic, and it tries to make us feel that way too. At a point, the character stretches the ratio to a bigger and normal size, and when that happens, it feels like a breath of fresh air, not only to the character but also to the audience. We feel what the character feels. It Comes at Night, directed by Trey Edward, is a very tense movie. It is shot in 235:1 ratio, but the nightmare sequences are shot in 275:1 ratio. The movie also very slowly keeps compressing the screen as it progresses, creating and building tension, making the world feel subconsciously more claustrophobic as the film progresses towards the end. By the end, it has the ratio of 3:1, which is a very wide screen. That also tells the audience that his reality has become his nightmare, which I think is a beautiful way to tell the story. The Justice League movie, directed by Joss Whedon, or also known as the Justice League, that's like a Bengali justice, never mind, had an aspect ratio of 185:1, but the Zack Snyder cut of the same movie, which will come out next year, will be 166:1. Snyder wanted the movie to be exactly as it is and not cropped.
My intent was to have the movie able to be the entire film play in a gigantic 1:3 aspect ratio on a giant IMAX screen. That's the original aspect ratio of the scene, the way it was shot. Like, that's right out of the camera. That's not like cropped for Instagram or anything. That's literally how it's photographed. And you can just tell when you look at the crop, and then when you look at the kind of full app version, it's a completely different sort of aesthetic. You know, it's just got a different quality, and one that is unusual. No one's doing that, and it's like its own 100% its own thing, and it owes nothing to whatever aspect ratio of a theatrical film was released in. Big part of our job. So so I was going to do a quick little aspect ratio, kind of like that. Like that's kind of what we're used to seeing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and so like what you would do is the entire picture.
So what happens when you actually film the motion picture, and this is true regardless, if you shoot Super 35 or any like open aperture, like you basically have underneath, unless it's anamorphic, underneath the image is this size. So this box is what is photographed.
So now you kind of know how filmmakers use aspect ratios or the size of the canvas to communicate and convey story, emotions, and feelings. Choosing an aspect ratio is one of the first visual decisions a filmmaker has to take before production or even pre-production begins. And that choice has a subtle influence on us to watch, and more than anything, filmmakers want to direct our attention. And in order to do that within the frame, they have to understand the meaning and relation of the aspect ratio to their story and with what they want to convey.